President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky called for a visa ban for Russian citizens in early August. In an interview with the Washington Post, he said that the Russians must understand that they are responsible for the war in Ukraine.
Whichever kind of Russian, make them go to Russia, they'll understand then. They'll say, this war has nothing to do with us. The whole population can be held responsible, can't it? It can. The population picked this government and they're not fighting it, not arguing with it, not shouting at it. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Washington Post.
Already at the end of August, the EU foreign ministers decided to complicate the process of obtaining visas for citizens of the Russian Federation and suspend the simplified visa regime with Russia. Now Russians have to wait for Schengen visa for several months. At the same time, the neighboring countries of Russia got an opportunity to impose additional restrictions for Russian tourists. The Baltic States were the first to act.
The Baltic States have reached an agreement to significantly limit, with some exceptions, border crossing by citizens of the Russian Federation who have EU Schengen visas. Edgars Rinkēvičs, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia, on Twitter.
The ban is expected to take effect on September 15th. An exception will be made for political refugees, people traveling for medical treatment or humanitarian reasons, such as reuniting with family or burying relatives.
This is quite a pragmatic reason. Since the beginning of the war, the main flow to the EU goes through the Baltic States and through Finland. And it used to be so before. But now this wave of migration, which comes, firstly, it is large, and secondly, it is dangerous, because the Russian state is set up in such a way that it tries to infiltrate any flows. And the flows, like people who are fleeing the regime or trying to breathe in the air of freedom. No one knows who is hiding in these flows.
Those flows are well known to the Baltic states. Recently in Narva, Estonia, where almost 90% of the population is ethnic Russians, a monument, a Soviet tank, was dismantled. Hundreds of local Russians, who, by the way, have lived in Estonia for decades, rushed to defend the monument. They were on duty at the monument, and those especially active made threats of Putin's attack. But in Latvia, the dismantling of the Soviet monument ended in detentions. During the removal, the Russians tried to march and sing Soviet songs. Some of them were detained by the police. There was no deportation, but to avoid an overflow of funds of the Russian world, the Baltic states decided to restrict entry to Russian tourists.
This is a political decision, demonstrative, which is directed at the domestic political field in order to show its citizens the willingness to take drastic steps. Secondly, it is directed at EU countries to get a stronger position not only on Ukraine, but also to fund programs to protect the eastern flank of NATO and the EU. And finally, it is solidarity with Ukraine. Only one reason, because Russia has attacked people in Ukraine, is killing people in Ukraine, is occupying territories, makes a nuclear threat. And of course, such citizens from such a country should not be welcomed.
Finland, another country neighboring Russia, has not yet joined the visa restrictions, but has significantly reduced the number of tourist visas for Russians. Reported by Roman Smoler, Ksenia Barvinenko, UATV News.